Good morning, Chavara. Good erev Yontif. I'm here together with my dear neighbor, Rabbi Eliav Freedman, the famous Rabbi Eliav Freedman, the older brother of Rabbi Gab. So if you want to know who Shnel Rabbi Gab Avek, it's this man right here.
Very good, very good.
So we were discussing a bunch of things, and something we touched upon was, there's a lot of hype with Shuas, with, all these, like, this, and Shuas is this, and Shuas is that, and, all that energy and the hype with Shuas. But let's say you have a guy that's, like, just not feeling it. I don't know, he hasn't been learning well the past few months, and like he's going into Shavuos now, and he just feels like he's just not feeling a connection. He's not feeling, he's like really deep down not looking forward to Yontif. How could a person get into it on such short notice? That's a heavy question.
That's you did like a warm up, something easy to start. No, we're jumping
right in. And
I first say I'm just excited to finally make it to the status. I think there's one picture of me drunk on the status so far. Like this is the first time I'm sober.
Yeah. For those who know, or you may not know, or you may know, Rabbi Freedman over here is one of the biggest therapists that deals with the most complex cases.
Chill.
In probably the whole Ramat Beit Shemesh. So I'm lucky to have such a holy neighbor such as Rabbi Freedman.
That's very sweet of you. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I'm saying the truth. I'm speaking the truth.
I'm going to apologize also that I'm not looking at the camera when the light turns green. My wife gets very upset when I drive without looking at where I'm going. It's a long-standing feud we have over 25 years. But a person's not feeling it, and how can they? I think that we can look at it from a few different perspectives. I think the most important perspective is just to be honest with ourselves, and I think that's something that sometimes is very hard for us, because like, what's wrong with me? Like, why am I not into it? There could be so many reasons that we might not be into it. There's so many reasons that we're having a hard time connecting, and I don't think that it's a question of right or wrong. I think it's a question of being honest with how we feel and giving ourselves space to feel. Learning is not easy for everyone, and even for people who love learning, there are times that learning is very hard. There's definitely a true, Torah is one of those things that needs to be a certain, so there's a certain amount of challenge that we have to push through, and we have to recognize that on the one hand. On the other hand, we have to be honest with ourselves, and just, the notion that there's a saying here in Eretz Yisrael, what doesn't go with force goes with even more force. And that certainly is an approach that I think is very difficult for a lot of Anglos when they come here, because like it's a square peg, it ain't going to fit in the round hole. So like we need to be honest with ourselves. On the other hand, I think it is good to also at the same time to realize that sometimes that a little bit of pushing through is what's going to make the difference. So one thing I would just say is like, let's recognize. I heard once from a person I respect tremendously, a very big mechanech. His name is Rabbi Eliav. He should be well. He's an older gentleman, and he said like it's a little bit chaval that the Shulchan Aruch told us that, quoting the Rambam, that there's a chiyuv for a person to stay up all night on Leil HaSeder. There's a chiyuv to stay up on Leil HaSeder, and it's a lotion of the Rambam until you just pass out. You just can't stay awake anymore. He said the Leil HaShavuos, though, it's not even brought by the Shulchan Aruch, if I'm not mistaken. I think it's the Mishnah Berurah brings the Shlach Kodesh to bring such a minhag. So he said Chaval. He said the Shulchan Aruch made a mistake. He should have written. He said, what do we find? How many people stay up all night on Leil HaSeder? How many people do you know stay up all night on Leil HaSeder? Almost nobody. How many people stay up Leil HaShavuos? It's like it's the thing. It's geshmak. The Shulchan Aruch, the Mechaber, should have written on Leil HaSeder it's a minhag, and then everyone would do it, and right on Shavuos that it's a chiyuv, and nobody would do it, and then everything would be the way that it ought to be. We have to remember that there's a minhag to stay up all night. It's a beautiful minhag, and a minhag of Klal Yisrael, something which is very choshev and very kodesh. There is no chiyuv. You don't have to do this. What I would suggest somebody consider is, what is the way, Shavuos is a time of Kabbalas Torah, what is the way that I can most genuinely connect to Kabbalas Torah? What's the thing which is going to speak to me most, which is going to most help me connect to Torah, to connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu? There's so many different things that could be, and it could be staying up all night, and it might be not staying up all night, but having your own Seder in your living room or in a base medrash during the day. Almost every neighborhood will be a Shachris later, daven Shachris later, and then sit down and learn and connect in your own way. It might be through saying Tikkun Shavuos, it might be through learning Gemara, it might be through learning Tanakh. There's so many different. Torah is as broad as can be. It's as wide as the Yam. It's as deep as everything. Find that area, that space, that way to connect. It might be through sitting and saying Tehillim all night long. I don't believe that there is a right or wrong way. I think that there is the way that's going to most speak to you and your neshama in this particular time, that's going to help you best connect. And the only person who can really know that is you. So I invite everyone to do their best to connect to the innermost parts of themselves and really ask themselves, what do I need to be able to connect to the Torah, to be able to connect to Kabbalah, to be able to connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu right now? Whatever the answer to that is, that's what I invite them to do.
Rabbi Freedman. So we're walking to the Kosel. Rabbi Friedman, who just started telling me this murder of art on this week's Haftarah. Share with the Olam. They got to hear this, Rabbi Friedman.
They do have to hear this. I think this is a massive thing. So this week's Haftarah tells us a story about the premonition of the birth of Shimshon HaGibor. There's a guy named Manoach, and he's got his wife, and his wife is in the whole story that she's out in the field, doesn't have any children, but she's out in the field, and the Amalek comes to her and explains to her that she's going to have a baby. And says, listen, this baby is going to be a nazir, and I bet that I dream by and therefore all sorts of rules, all sorts of things that they should be doing. Manoach is completely, like, they didn't realize at first that it was a malach. They thought that sometimes the word malach means a navi. They assumed that's what it meant. But Manoach is very confused. He doesn't understand really the instructions. And that he davens, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, please send back this messenger so that I can understand what it is I'm supposed to be doing with this kid. So the malach comes back. Forget all the details of the story, but the malach, it seems in the lashon of the pasuk, the malach doesn't add anything. It just says, everything that I told your wife, Tisha Mem, everything that I said, well, that's what you got to do. So the obvious question is, well, so Manoach was very confused. He didn't understand. And then comes back the malach and doesn't add any information. So what was it accomplished? So it seems the Meshech Chochmah alludes to this in about 3 words. But Schwab, he speaks that idea out very, very beautifully. He says, Manoach is bothered. If someone's coming and telling you that we're going to have a child, it's going to be a miracle baby, and it's going to be a Nazir, from the time he's born, he's going to be a Nazir. How in the world am I supposed to raise a Nazir? I've got wine in my house. I take haircuts on a regular dude. What am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to do this? So the Malach, he says, Hashem, I don't get it. I need you to send me a message. So comes back the Malach, and he says, everything that I told the woman, she has to guard. What that means is, if you're not going to live life, at least to some extent, like a Nazir, you can't raise a Nazir. I think one of the biggest mistakes we make, not everything has to be exactly, it's very easy to blame parents for not setting a good example. It's a little bit overblown in my opinion. But one thing that we do need to know, one thing that is important, is to expect our kids to be better than us. We all have this. We didn't work quite successful in the yeshivas we wanted to be. We're not quite serious about davening we want to be. But our kids are going to do it, right? But they don't have the experience that I had. And they don't have the challenges. My dear friends, if you're watching this video, and you've got kids, probably the understanding that they have in some ways so much greater than yours. The door I grew up in the 1990s, it was a crazy time to be growing up and to be from. But here we are 30 years later, it's way worse. It's way worse. So if you want your kids to be living a certain life, you have to create the environment that suits that life. If you sit, I'm not judging anybody, but if the way you relax is by YouTube shorts, even if it's Rabbi Eliav's, videos, then that's going to be what your kids understand. When I was getting married, my father told me, I think a very beautiful thing. He said, if you want that when your kids wake up early Shabbos morning, what they do is they take in a newspaper and they sit on the couch. Then when you wake up early Shabbos morning, take in the newspaper and sit on the couch. If what you want is for your kids to wake up early Shabbos morning, open a sefer and sit on the couch, then you should open a sefer and sit on the couch. Now, you're doing it won't guarantee that your kids will, but at least you're creating the environment that is right for that type of thing to happen. I think that's the message that Schwab is telling us, apparently also the Meshech Chochmah, is essentially what Manoach is coming to tell us. If you want to raise a Nazir, create a Nazir environment.
Oh man, Rabbi Freedman. Rabbi Freedman, rephrase the question what I asked, because you had a murder answer.
Okay, so the way I understood the question is, how do we help our kids appreciate that just because something is okay for us doesn't necessarily mean it's okay for them? The classic example being, it's okay for mommy or tati to have a smartphone, but not for them. That my parents are allowed to have access to the internet, but I don't. Well, how do we, if we do it, especially in light of what we just said, that we have to create a certain environment? So how do we balance it? How do we get that distinction across there? I think it's an awesome and very critical question. What I think is that kids don't have a hard time understanding that parents are different than kids. In fact, they get that at a very young age. There are things that are okay for their parents that are not okay for kids. A simple example. Most kids are not going crazy about the fact that they can't, no, we got to get the right view.
You got to get the right view. We just got to.
This is amazing.
Yeah.
Wow, I feel almost like Nana. I don't think kids have a hard time understanding why their parents are allowed to drive the car. They're not allowed to drive the car. I think they get that. I don't think kids have a hard time understanding why their parents are allowed to buy alcohol or vote in an election, but they're not allowed to. Kids intuitively appreciate the fact that their parents are bigger, stronger, smarter. They get that. Okay, at a certain age they'll start pushing back, especially as they get closer, but that's not such an issue. What kids are going to have a hard time is when there's inconsistency in the messaging. Meaning, if our message is, listen, smartphones are for work. Smartphones are really meant to be used as a tool for particular things. And when there's a time in your life that will be right for you to have that tool, you'll have it. But until then, the dangers outweigh the benefits. That message will work if that's our relationship with our phone. If our relationship with our phone is that we really use it for only those specific things, then they can appreciate it. If our relationship with the internet is one in which we're using it for work, for research, for banking, etc., but we're not using it for entertainment, then our kids can accept the notion that that's what it's about. But if it really is about entertainment, then how come you can have that and I can't? And that's going to be a much harder answer to give you still can have the conversation. And I actually, personally, I think the best approach is to invite these conversations. Invite the conversation of, why is it okay for me to sit here and not you? Now, first of all, Beneinu, my friends, I don't know if it really is okay for any of us to be sitting by a machine that doesn't have any kind of filter. The best line I ever heard about the internet was the Moshe Sternbuch Shlita. He said that if the internet existed in the time of Kosel, it would have been Gezer and Isser Yisig. So, in Echanami, we all have to be careful. But we should be careful, and we should have conversations with our kids. Why is it okay, or why is it not okay for us to have these things? Why do we, or why don't we have it? Maybe you believe, and that's fine, that I'm not going to judge anybody. Maybe you think it is okay to watch sports online, or even to watch other things that are entertainment online, but then really explain, well, the reason that it's okay for me to sit there is because at this point in my life, I've developed myself at a certain level of maturity, a certain level of safety, but have a frank conversation on a related type of note.
Open communication.
Open communication. I've told many parents this and they have a hard time with this. If you can't explain to your child why they shouldn't smoke weed, then they should smoke weed. No, I don't mean that they should smoke weed. What I mean is, if you can't explain why not, then how do you expect them to not? And if you don't have a good reason, let's start doing some research and doing good reason. I think where we run into our biggest problem with chinuch are in the areas that we haven't really thought it through. We haven't really worked it out, and we're just kind of doing whatever we're doing, or we're doing whatever happens to feel right to us in the moment. And because we haven't really worked it through, that's why we get into all sorts of trouble when our kids start asking, frankly, very good questions. So let's work it through. Let's think about it. Our children are also an opportunity for us to grow. And the way we grow is by, when they challenge us, instead of saying, you say, wow, that's a great question.
Right.
You know what? I want to think about that, and we're going to talk about it again.
Validate the question.
And
Appreciate the question.
Appreciate the question. And then Taka, do that. Do your research. Come back to them. Don't wait for them to come back to you. Come back to them and have that conversation, explain it to them, and it will be enriching for them and for you. And I'll say one last idea, and that is, I think it's very important to realize, our kids don't need to agree with our reasoning. They don't feel they need to agree with our reasoning. They need to know that there is a reason. If we have a svara for what we're doing, if we have it worked out, even if they don't agree with it, they'll respect it. When it seems like we're pulling out blood stories and we're just making things up, that's where kids get
They pick up on it. They sniff it out.
Right away they pick up. So that's really going to be the key. Have it worked out, and even if they don't agree and they don't like it, but if they see that you've thought about it and you're taking the issue seriously, and taking them seriously, then they'll be okay with whatever it is that you decide.
Thank you, Rabbi Freedman.